everybody. I'm Antonella, and I will be your moderator for today. I'm a journalist and the producer of Investing in Regenerative Agriculture and Food podcast, a podcast that we started kind of 9 years ago, not because we think finance is so important than everything else, but mostly because we believe financing and investments are a tool to make this transition to a more sustainable agriculture and food system faster, also to speed up this full transition. And today, actually, we are going to discuss how we can build trust in the carbon farming markets. Because, I mean, thank you to the speakers that are joining today. We are going to use these 90 minutes to understand from different perspectives, from the farmer side to the policy side, to the market side, and to the scientists and research side, what it's missing at the moment, mostly because we want to keep a positive framing in the narrative, what we can do to make it more trustworthy for all the stakeholders involved, from the public to the investor side, to the farmers and everything else. But before starting with that, we would like to actually discuss how we're going to split the session. So if Beatrice can, actually I give this one. Yes. So the session will start with an introduction from all the speakers. Then we will go for what builds confidence in the system, what actually is already happening, meaning what the CRCF is already doing and what is already not doing, but will do soon yet, to go to the data and risk and value proposition, and then we will get a closing session wrapping up to understand the next steps in the next 24 months. We tried to go first to understand who is in the room at the moment, so if you can take your phone and scan the QR code, we would like to understand who you are in this room.
What did we do before Slido?
But you can tell yourself already. You're going to get the mic. So the results are slowly popping up. Yeah, but I think I'm... Yeah, but we should also be able to see the results soon, potentially. I don't see anything. Yeah, I think the results are coming in, and it's by far researchers, NGO, MRV, okay, finance and farmers are picking up at the moment. So I would say it's quite of a differentiated audience in the room, covering kind of the 4, 5 pillars we were actually hoping and considering to have here in the room today. Research is slightly winning, but yeah, that's great. And actually, I will let a few more, okay, this is potentially done. But we have another question instead, and it's what are you here for? Like, why did you decide to join this session more than any of the other parallel sessions running at the moment? So the answer is becoming, I'm telling for people not able to see the screen, understanding CRCF for 32%, and then we have investability and finance, followed by data and MRV, followed by policy alignment, but yeah, mostly it's in general understanding CRCF. Apparently your presentation this morning was, they're not done with that yet. Okay, this was actually just to understand more about the audience, but now I would like to leave the floor and the mic to the speakers of today. So I would start with Valeria Forlin from DG Clima, and yeah, the question is who you are representing, and potentially what would you like to leave the room today with, if there's an insight that you would like to get from the other speakers and from the audience.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me to this panel. So yes, I work in the European Commission, and for the last 4 years or 5, I've been working on the design and implementation of CRCF. And well, as I said this morning, there is a small window of opportunity to adjust some things in the regulation, and so maybe what I would like to get out of this session is any input, constructive input to this process.
Perfect. Then next to
from the border, I have to say. So I'm John Gilliland. I have my own farm. I'm a 5th generation farmer with the 6th and 7th generation already coming up behind me. I also chair one of the old European EIP operational groups called ARC0. So a group of 8 farmers on a journey towards net zero, so getting behavioral change around how do we do this. What would I like out of this? And I've been on this journey for 15 years. I would like to see an accuracy in MRV that actually picks up the changes I am making on my farm. And that's quite a difficult question.
Yeah. We will try. Then next, there's Carolina Lisboa, that's representing Verra today.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Carolina Lisboa. I work as a manager in Verra. For those who don't know Verra, Verra sets the world-leading standards for climate action in sustainable development. I work in Verra mainly ensuring that our agricultural methodologies are scientifically driven, adopt the best science that we have available today, and at the same time find a way to make it practical and to be implemented in a large scale. Yeah, I'm here today, I look forward to the discussion to learn more about the CRCF, as most of you here we saw in this slide, and also to find ways how we as the voluntary carbon market can collaborate and support the CRCF framework.
Yes, thank you very much. We at Secana, we are an MRV provider who has been operating in the soil organic carbon space over the past 5 years, mostly servicing offsetting and more also these insetting projects. And we have been involved in the development of methodologies both on the Verra and gold standard side, as well as partially on the CRCF side. And the main tension that we see is around how do we reconcile the speed that we need in deployment so that we actually get towards implementing the actions now, and at the same time maintaining the integrity. So we cannot compromise on that, and that's really what I would like to take out from the session, is how do we reconcile both speed of action, of actually implementing now, and maintaining the integrity.
Kelly and Ross, that's great, and it's one of the partners of the OGCR project, founded by the European Union.
Yes, as Antonella said, Kellyanne Ross. So I'm an independent based out of Switzerland, and I am working on the OGCR project and looking at the business demonstration cases. So this is to take the research components that come out of this project and make sure that they are functioning in a business case. And because we are building something that could support farmers to be able to use what research we're producing, what I really want to get out of CRCF is what those requirements would look like, and the standards required through this panel discussion.
Yeah. And then Ishani Wheeler, that's last but not least.
Hello everyone, my name is Ishani Wheeler. I am the research coordinator of OpenGeo Hub Foundation, which is an independent not-for-profit research foundation focused on open source software development, open access data, particularly for environmental variables. So soil, trees, water, elevation, all the things that go into your models. What would I like? Oh, I'm also the project coordinator from the Intergenerational Open Geospatial Carbon Registry. I'm sorry, it's a mouthful, OGCR. And what I would like from today is I'd like to get a better understanding of where the line could be between essentially public good MRV infrastructure and commercial activities, because I think speed matters as well.
Yeah. Thank you so much for this introduction. So we are going to jump into the first, let's say, block of this session. That will be about how we can build confidence. And to do that, I would start from Valeria. So we would like actually to understand how CRCF, considering where we come from, so where there were period of uncertainties and lack of transparency, and also double counting, as you were mentioning this morning. How can CRCF actually build transparency and integrity? And what is possible today thanks to CRCF that was not possible before. Thank you. And just to mention, there will be actually, again, on Slido, we are going to pick questions for the public, from the public.
Yes, so one of the first, the main aims and objectives when we started designing this legislation was indeed the observation that there were a lot of different standards and that created confusion among operators and buyers alike, and we wanted to provide some harmonization, as this is in general the role of the European Union to harmonize rules among its member states, and we thought this would be the first step into to build. It will provide the fundamental infrastructure to build more policy incentives for carbon farming in the future. And when it comes to transparency and integrity, what comes really to mind is the registry, which would bring together data from different registries as far as European projects are concerned, so that you have one place where you see all the units issued under the schemes, so that avoids double counting the actions from the same project twice. And also now I talk about something, I mentioned something that I don't know very much in detail, but the blockchain technologies that our colleagues are developing based on tokens and these NFTs, I don't remember exactly what that means, but I understand it's a very powerful tool to ensure traceability. So this for me is one of the key contribution to integrity. Then there is also the certification process itself. The fact that there would be a check about the governance and of the schemes and the way they implement methodologies is also an element that can bring trust in the system. And finally, the methodologies, well, they are built actually on existing methodologies from the voluntary carbon markets, and I don't want to pretend that they bring more integrity than existing methodologies on the market. There is certainly the notion of co-benefits for biodiversity, which is not something that is usually found, but in terms of quantification, they build on existing practice. But what they do is to bring different activities, such as for carbon farming, we have 3 activities and maybe more in the future. For permanent removals, we have 3 activities now and maybe more in the future. They bring them in the same piece of law with the same structure. When there are parts that are similar, the text is the same. I think just this broad coverage of a lot of different activities within the same legal framework can help a lot operators that have maybe the intention of entering different activities. For example, a farmer who wants to convert part of his land into afforestation and to re-wet part of his land that is organic, but on other parts of their land they want to do agroforestry. It's all part of the same framework. I think this harmonization can also be very powerful to trigger change in a more holistic way.
Thank you so much. We're going to do this feature of microphones quite a bit, I think, today. There's a Slido coming that actually would be, again, for the audience before we ask into the farmer. And the question is, what would you say is the key element to ensure the success of the European carbon farming? So that Slido question will be open while we go back to John. And actually, we ask his perspective of what a system, a trustworthy system, long-term engagement system in the carbon farming should have.
The key thing for me in carbon farming, getting it recognized in the CRCF, is the fact that carbon farming is about temporary removals. And, and I respect the bravery and the leadership that actually DG Klima and Valerie's team have been, taking on the conversation about temporary carbon removals, because some people call it greenwashing. And if we're to do this right, it's really important then that we actually look at what is the appropriate measuring, reporting, and verification around temporary carbon removals. And I think that is going to make or break this journey and whether we secure public trust public credibility in the journey that we're in, is how do we prove that, I'm a rotational farmer, we change our rotation. We also need flexibility because the market signals, the weather signals change. I have to change my decisions from time to time. So we need that flexibility. It's not I'm trying to cheat the system, but I, as the decision maker on my piece of land, need to be able to have that flexibility to respond to the market, to respond to weather, but still deliver on the commitment that I'm managing my carbon, my overall carbon stocks in a journey going forward. And I think that's really important. For me as a farmer, I come from Ireland, and we have a lot of livestock, we have a lot of grass, and our big issue, we're trying to get away from a monoculture of perennial ryegrass and put herbs and legumes in. And so one of the key things we're doing in our MRV is we're measuring carbon deep in the soil. So 15 centimeters, 30 centimeters, 60 centimeters, a meter deep. And as we go on this journey of increasing diversity of plant species in our sward, we're seeing more carbon, but we're seeing it deeper. And it's very important for us that the MRV we have to capture our journey, because we're not only building carbon stocks, we're reducing nitrous oxide emissions. So I'm also delighted that actually CRCF are bringing in a review to make sure livestock emissions are going to be included in this, because I don't just build carbon. I produce food, I produce meat, and it's very difficult for me just to pick out soil carbon and ignore everything else. So I welcome the journey, and I welcome that what CRCF brings is a statutory framework of, that gives a credibility to the journey I and my fellow farmers are on at the moment.
I don't know if anybody of the speakers wants to comment, or anybody on the audience. We're going to actually, again on Slido, open the questions for now. We're going to then pick most, let's say, voted or the most repeated, and we're going to give them to the speakers. But if nobody else wants to intervene at the moment, we're going to go for the next block of the session, and that's more about what CRCF can do and how that changes the, let's say, the reality of the players already in the system for a while, and I mean for Sequana and for Verra. And that's why I would ask, first of all, to Julian, how can modeling, uncertain measurements, and direct measurements reinforce each other to strengthen uncertainty and to strengthen transparency and integrity?
Does this work? Yeah, perfect. So first of all, thank you, John, for pointing out also that the statutory framework in itself already provides a layer of trust and certainty. And I think that is very important to recognize about the CRCF, because indeed what also Valeria pointed out earlier is that the methodology itself builds on existing methodologies, which is also reinforces this layer of trust, that we now need this convergence of the different methodologies that already exist under the statutory framework that provides an extra layer of trust. And at the same time, we also must be aware that all the methodologies, of course, are imperfect, and that we will need iteration of that. And I think in the there are two great examples of that. One is something that I talked with John about earlier at this conference, the Australian standard, which has been around since back in 2015, and they have iterated on it a couple of times. And a lot of these standards that we've seen in the voluntary carbon market, like Verra, have actually also iterated along the same lines. So they all build on each other, and this using this development, which is already taking place, and reinforcing that with the CRCF, I think is very powerful for creating this layer of trust. Now, when it comes to the specifics of the MRV process, we believe that it is very important that we use all the technologies that we have at our disposal. So definitely make use of the models that have been used for a long time in many different contexts, both biogeochemical models and then also now these more innovative approaches with remote sensing, digital soil models that are now being integrated also at Verra through the VT14 tool. And this is something where, at the moment, we're still seeing a little bit of a gap between the methodology development that is ongoing at Verra and the CRCF, because the space is evolving so quickly that, of course, it is difficult to always keep up with that. But we trust that with the certification scheme system that the CRCF runs, that also these more innovative approaches will become available. Now, the ground layer of trust that we will always need is the measured data from the specific projects, so that any type of modeling, we always make sure that it actually matches the data that we find on the specific farms that are part of our projects. And that is another foundational layer of trust that we always say we're tethered to the data that we find on the farms itself. And the VT14 module under Vera actually provides a good example for how you can reconcile the innovative remote sensing models, digital soil models, together with the ground measured samples, how you do remeasurement campaigns, how you assess bias, uncertainty on a rolling basis, to then duly account for that and take that into consideration. So I think we're on a good path. We will need all the technologies, and I think with evolving methodologies that build on top of each other and drive towards convergence, we will build towards that trust.
Thank you so much, Julian. And yeah, we're now curious to hear what's actually, for Vera, what's going to change and how CRCF can improve alignment between voluntary market and public standards. So, Carolina, if you can answer.
Yeah, thank you for the easy question. Yeah, I think the carbon removal and carbon farming framework, European framework, has really huge potential to bring alignment between the voluntary carbon farming, the voluntary market and the compliance market. And I think to do that, first we need to align on the same principles. These principles of how to access additionality, how to access permanence, how to access leakage, and so on and so forth. And also how to build an MRV platform that can be interoperable. That means how can we share data, how we are collecting data, how we gonna define the criteria, the rules to analyze the data, to access uncertainty, and also to track the data from the source and bring transparency, because that is exactly what bring trust. I think we all can accept that the data has some level of uncertainty, but I think what we really want is transparency about that. How are we reporting that, and how are we doing the accounting to compensate for that uncertainty in the data? And yeah, we are very motivated and excited, waiting to see now I think in April, right? You're gonna launch the call, yeah, when we can, the voluntary market can start submitting their methodologies for access and to be recognized under the CRCF scheme. And we heard that very clear yesterday on the panel from one of the biggest food companies saying, we are waiting for the CRCF to tell us, are you accepting Vera? Are you accepting gold standard? Are you accepting, which standard you accepted? Once we have that signal that they are waiting for the policymakers, to them, the demand will come, and that can scale the carbon farming. It's kind of a chicken and egg cycle, but I think we can, I'm a very positive person, I think we can still find a way to move together in that direction because we share the same goal, right? And I think it's basically it. I think once we can align just two sides from the private financing, align with public policy, environmental policy, I think when we find the secret and start speaking the same language, we can definitely scale it and make it implementable in the ground.
Thank you so much. You actually brought in the key word of the next block, that would be data. And with data, of course, there also the value and the risks coming, and the allocation, who is taking care of that. But yeah, before going and dive deep in that interesting topic, I would like to hear the position of Ishani. That's from, let's say, the research side. Which are the design principles that can ensure that CRCF builds like a trusted infrastructure for the system? From your perspective, from your experience, which design principles are key to be considered?
That's a difficult question, actually. Thank you. So which design principles? I think number one, regulation, like law. It's critically important. I'm a mandatory market person. I come out of developing the Australian system, and yeah, we iterate a lot, and I'm sure most of the mistakes in there were mine. So sorry about that. And you know, we learned a lot in that process, and I can reflect quickly on that to just say, look, you know, if you put everything into the legislation itself, it's very hard to change. So like respect each process as it is. And then over time, yeah, as Julian said, it started to be more in like I don't know the proper name for it, but like aligned documents next to it. And so this morning or yesterday, we're talking about a similar thing, a guideline, a thing. Because there's always going to be errors that are found. There's always going to be, like for years, there were arguments between statisticians about this equation, that equation, that equation, that equation. And when they're arguing at that level, I tell you, there's like 10 people in the world who can argue at that level. And that's not, so having the regulatory framework there, having the certainty, knowing that the knowledge will always improve, and I think if there's regulation backing it, then you have like right of recourse, you have like a framework where if things go wrong, people can be held accountable. So I think as a just, yeah, that's like a governance principle. I'm taking liberty to call it a design principle, but I think it's important. And then from a registry point of view, yes, one place to record everything is the easiest way to deal with double counting. Like totally, a lot of the issues in the past is just you can't check the record. You can't check. And lots of effort was put into reconstructing all the claims and then checking those. It was a lot of scientists' time went into that. So having one place, so it's easier, so we can all learn together. And then otherwise, I mean, of course, I'm going to say open source, so we can actually just sort of elevate the, you know, treat it like a pre-competitive landscape where we get everyone to a good enough level, yeah, and then business on top. Because whilst everyone is down in the, like the nitty-gritty competing on a business level, it's not going to work, right? It's so a bit setting common, I'm going to say standards, but it's not the right word. Yeah, elevating the playing field, leveling the playing field for farmers and participants, but then elevating the playing field for businesses. That's the sort of design principles we're sort of going at it and using. So I took some liberty, pardon me.
Thank you so much. But yeah, now you mentioned the registry, and so by registry you mean the one that's under construction because of the Horizon project? At least we started the process with CAFA.
There are many registries.
Yeah,
there is only
European.
one official registry, and that comes from DG Klima.
Yeah.
But there were, as far as my understanding goes, there are several registries in development. Ours is one, and we use our open principles to go, okay, this is what we think is required, and then we share those. If they're useful, they can be copied and used, right, with no restriction. But I think almost more importantly, to my earlier point, is that we're actually also building a lot of software modules around it. Because we're geospatial people, and we're like, yeah, we know how to do maps, we know how to calculate things over space and time, that software is not easy. So if we can just put it all into open source, so at least when a company goes, okay, I want to start that, they've got already building blocks, right, that they can put together in software that already all the back doors talk to each other, all the APIs work together across all these different pieces of software you're going to need. And then we hope also for industry with established software, it's just going to be easier that they have the specification. They can go, okay, we need to put those things in. And then the software developers have an easier time to match it up. If they don't have to invent it, it's much easier to match and integrate.
Yeah, and that brings us to a very also relevant point that's about democratization. And about that, I would like to understand from Kelly, and also thanks to her corporate experience in corporations, like how can we put democratization at the center of a trust infrastructure in this case? How do you see that? What's your experience can tell us?
I'm not sure I can draw on my corporate experience so much for democratization.
But you saw that side, you are seeing another side now, and how can these two worlds not clash, but actually collaborate?
So I think just to explain what democratization of the MRV is, what we're thinking about. So I mentioned at the beginning that we have a lot of valuable research partners as part of the project. So they produce maps on soil carbon, above ground biomass at 10-meter resolution. They use those maps to monitor carbon, to measure carbon stock changes. That's the M in the MRV. You can automate reporting systems, I think, which Ish was talking about through the API integrations of the different software. You can have farmers submit data for verification. So you can start to make a system of MRV that farmers can use themselves, right? And so I think the idea is that, like, if you can get a lot of smaller farmers or organizations to adopt these systems because they have something that's accessible to them, and I think JRC as well was speaking a lot about having, I forget the name of it exactly from the presentation from Panos earlier, but it was a lot of different tools that can be accessible to growers. So it's like, how can we make them accessible to growers so that they actually use them? And if they do start to adopt these, to be able to see the value proposition of the carbon that they're storing in their land, then I think we bring a lot of liquidity to the market. And that is essentially what we're looking to do.
Thank you. I do have now some questions about ownership of data and risk and value allocation, but I would also like to acknowledge the questions that are popping up here. I'm not sure I'm going to do that. Maybe I will get the microphone and just go up somewhere there and read it. Unless somebody else in the public wants to just not use Slido and just ask. I don't know if anybody wants to get the mic and ask questions, or I will just get to Slido. I will get to Slido. Let me have a look what's happening here. And yeah, I see many questions, many people that...
Your mic still isn't on.
Say it again?
The mic's not on.
Okay, that's interesting. Like this? No. Yes, yes. Okay. So national GHG based on EPCC inventory methodologies versus CRCF methodologies. Will this be integrated and how? That's easy question for Valeria, I think.
No, it's a very important point, the fact that we want national inventories at the end of the day to reflect that action takes place on the ground. But that doesn't mean that a CRCF unit should go one-to-one into the inventory as a ton of CO2 reduced, because the MRV is completely different. Just the fact that a unit is computed against a baseline, that you need to subtract the greenhouse gas emissions that sometimes are in the value chain, or in the life cycle of the unit, or outside the scope of the traditional IPCC sectoral classification. There are so many elements in the CRCF methodology that are completely different from how an inventory is computed. But what matters is that to certify a project, data will be collected, activity data will be collected, models will be improved, calibrated and validated over time with more and more data. And these might have hopefully will have a trickle-down effect towards improving the data that national inventory compilers use for the national inventories. So we know better what happens on the ground, we know better what the impact of these practices on mitigation, because the whole carbon farming system, not just because of CRCF, maybe because of also the parallel work of researchers, it's all a community of knowledge and the data that will overall improve the national inventories, but this is a very diffused process. And that's why knowledge sharing is so important to us. And we also included a provision about it in the methodology. We will try to make sure that the certification scheme engage as much as possible in sharing knowledge from the certification experience, of course, with anonymity subject to anonymity rules, but it's important that we use this opportunity of all this data that will be created to improve also the national inventories.
John, also, you want to jump in this easy question?
No, so this is my wish list, okay? Because as a farmer, I have 3 different audiences that come onto my farm asking me questions about my journey on climate change, carbon farming. So they're the purchasers of the food I produce. And if I'm a mixed farmer, I could have a livestock processor and an arable processor asking the same question. The second thing is, in my case, my own farm is already beyond net zero today, okay? So we have members of the voluntary carbon market coming knocking our door. We would like, can we have your surplus? And then I have government knocking my door, is we have to do our annual return on the national inventory. And so a plea as a farmer who is genuine, who wants to go on this journey, can we lift once and use many times? Because you are relying totally on the goodwill of farmers to hand over data. And we can talk about data ownership, but I'm just thinking about time efficiency, okay? I'm time poor. So I'm pleading with all the strategists around here. If you want me and my peers to go on this journey, can we lift once, can we lift efficiently, and can we use multiple times? There is absolutely the difference then between project accounting and inventory accounting. But in fairness, I don't need to know that. It's not, you know, and so I think we have to do some work behind the scenes, okay? I think it's absolutely relevant that when my data is lifted, it is able to answer all 3 of those customers, okay? And I think we have to be smart in how we do it. Absolutely on APIs, we have to get APIs to work. If anyone in this room has ever gone in and had to do a farm carbon calculator, it makes life very easy if you've already got a heap of APIs into that calculator that have already connected to data sets that have pre-populated maybe 80% of your farm data. It makes my life very easy. So I do think we need to crack it, not only for the public, but actually for the people who have to change their behavior, that being farmers. Make the right thing the easy thing to do.
Yeah, I saw you also raising your hands before.
Oh, it's such a good question. It's in OGCR, it's actually an active research line for us. How do you bring these essentially project level numbers? So this in IPCC language, this is tier 3 approach. And that's going to be required in a few years for various sectors in agriculture in Europe. So how do you bring a tier 3 approach that comes from a variety of sources? It has to go through the registry, thank goodness, because I don't know how we do it otherwise. How do we bring that into essentially a national account? So that's being worked on now, and I can't tell you exactly how, but But what I can tell you is that essentially changes happen somewhere and sometime. So as far as we can see, if something is happening on a project, which is this group of pixels here, it exists within a reporting framework up to the top. Okay, because at the moment I can tell you for certainty across multiple conventions, UNCCD, UNFCCC, these layers are not connected. There's no way they talk. I've never found an example of them talking. So it's being actively worked on, but it does bring up other questions that I saw go past in Slido. I'm writing half of them down because I don't want to lose them, about who owns which part. So this is also an open question, right? I mean, Australia faced this problem, and we essentially had to amend our legislation to say the top 30 centimeters of soil belongs to the person who owns the land, and everything else below that is mining right. And that's why it's 0 to 30 in Australia. I don't know if everyone else has to go that direction, But the idea of like, if it's going to have to go onto the national accounts, and it's going to have to go to IPCC level, whatever that is, but just because it's on the government account, I don't think it means they own it. So there's this differentiation between ownership and reporting. But I'll leave it there, please.
Yeah. Julia?
Maybe as an addition there, I think an interesting question is also when we reconcile this project level accounting with the inventory accounting, the question comes up on which government's account is it actually? Because if you have the government where the farm is located and they account for a project emission, now we see alignment with also PECM Article 6 rules in the CRCF. What happens if a foreign government wants to purchase the project level credits? How do you reconcile that when you actually wanted to contribute to the inventory of, let's say, Northern Ireland, for the sake of argument?
I think goes back to Ish. Okay, we are going to answer to all in one question, I think.
Yeah. Our solution for that is there's only one planet, and there is only so many pixels, and though governments may change, the data record should not. And then in terms of transfer between countries, that implies the transfer of ownership, which means if you are transferring the ownership between countries, you must have a line in your national accounts that corrects for transfer of ownership. This means everything is mandatory market. You might not have to have mandatory participation, that you have to reduce your emissions, but that it's like cadastral systems, right? It's a defined asset. It's measured, it's monitored, it's traded or not. It's used in a variety of ways. It's a geospatial problem from our point of view. Politically, I'm going to hand the mic back.
Hi, I'm Michael O'Connor is my name. I'm also Irish, as it happens. I'm a farmer, but part-time, but a full-time barrister for 30 years. And I've been looking at the ownership question, because in Ireland we like to talk about who owns the land and we don't like to hand it over too easily. But it seems to me, first of all, we need to look at who owns the existing baseline carbon. And I cannot see, and I haven't heard a good argument as to why the landowner would not own the carbon that's inherent in the soil, in the walls, in the lake that might be on the property or in the forests. And then when you add in all the additionality and all of that gets measured in under MRV, maybe that's a different discussion. Maybe the landowner can effectively deal with that in a lease or in a contract. But I think we need to look at it in a number of ways. One is we're looking at it in a very regulatory way and a contractual way as to these rights acquire economic value, but I think we also have to ask ourselves, is it in fact a property right? And if it is, if it's one of the bundle of sticks in your title of property, well then how can the state sell that to Ryanair or to whoever they might sell it to? There is no title, and I think we need to clarify that if we want the farmers to buy into it. And I come from a farming background, and certainly the first thing the farmer will ask is about ownership and title. And in Ireland, we don't have a history really of, for the last 100 years, the people who own the land also farm it, by and large. So it's different to other member states. I know that in Finland, this question, I think, has been answered by academics by saying that it's a regulatory right or it's a contractual right, but not a property right. But in a member state like Ireland, where A, we're common law, and B, we have a written constitution, I'm not so sure that it won't be found to be a property right.
One Irishman to another. Very dangerous. I take a different view in this, because actually for this journey, what we're talking about is not the ownership of the baseline carbon, but it's the ownership of the change over time. Okay? And for me, the person who, the organization or person who therefore should have ownership is the active person managing the land, because they are having to do something to build that carbon. And where it does really come into a problem, and particularly in Ireland, is the difference between rented land and owned land, and the difference between a tenant and a landlord. And I think there is a really big issue there. and particularly in Ireland, because we have this crazy Conacre system, 11-month leasing, okay, which is absolutely bonkers. So on my case, certainly, I own my own land. I will argue, and I'll fight, and my father's a lawyer, so I will fight that the carbon under my soil is ours. But actually, to a certain extent, I'm parking that. What I am absolutely arguing, if I as the land manager change my soil organic carbon from 80 tonne per hectare to 85 tonne per hectare, because of my activity, that 5 tonne per hectare then is up for conversation. And I have right, because I did the management that created that 5 tonne, not the 80 tonne, but the 5 tonne, the difference, you know, the delta on that. And I think we do need to have that conversation. And we do need to have the conversation between landlords and tenants. There are many, and it's not just an Irish thing, there are many parts of farming in Europe that is on rented land. And certainly in my part of the world, I think it's about 30–35% of Ireland is rented. And we do need to embrace where does the landlord-tenant relationship sit within that and that ownership. So I do think we need to crack that.
Thank you so much. Kellyanne? Yeah, go.
I just wanted to say on that point that I don't think it needs to be up for contestation. Like, I think that we can come up with solutions where we're not selling off the carbon specifically, but we're leasing a reporting right for that carbon. Because, I mean, reporting, whether it be at a national level or a corporate level, happens on an annual basis. It's aligned with financial reporting for corporates. And if there's a need to there's no need to purchase the carbon as some sort of commodity or asset. It belongs to the farmer, it belongs to the land, and the only need is to be able to say whether or not there has been a removal of carbon on that land linked to whatever agriculture products have come off that land. In the specific case of agriculture products, not in the case of maybe something that's not related to agriculture, like peatland restoration, where they look to generate an offset.
Valeria.
Can I also ask a question? Because yesterday I was I followed another session where this is a very French thing. I mean, I hear it only from French-speaking people for some reason, but no, I know the reason. The reason is that in label bas carbone, in the implementation of label bas carbone, a big challenge is that agri-food companies tell their farmers, you can't sell carbon credits because I want to claim these carbon credits, but I also don't pay you for that. So it's a bit of a blockage because it doesn't allow a lot of label bas carbone use or issuing units, and at the same time doesn't help the farmers. So some, I think including the government, are trying to clarify that there is no double claim, there is no problem of double claiming when the same information about the carbon stock or carbon stock change in that land is used both for inventory purposes by the value chain and for selling credits. And you just said that we should lease the information about the land when it's only for Scope 3 reporting, and then someone can also pay a credit which is different from the information attached to the land. I guess it's more an incentive. I was wondering what you think about that idea of there is no issue of co-claiming.
Yeah,
well,
I saw
within a value chain, sorry.
I saw 3 ends on the right. So
oh.
You can just decide.
Okay, I thought the question was directed to me, but I didn't know that. Okay.
To the panel.
Within a value chain, there's no issue of co-claiming, right? So if I'm the wheat farmer, I have my carbon footprint. I sell my wheat to a mill. They have their carbon footprint. The mill sells the wheat to a processor who produces flour. They have their carbon footprint. The retailer or bakery has the pizza bread and they produce their carbon footprint. So all of them get to claim the benefit of the carbon associated with that wheat. The co-claiming is absolutely allowed, but I'm not sure.
Can you have Michael Leary buying it as well as co-claiming?
No, he can't.
Sorry. I actually have a bit of a nuanced view on that because I think that is true as long as you don't have a net climate positive farm, because and you mentioned that, John, that you actually already are in the territory where you have excess removals on top of the emissions that you already have them covered. So when you have these excess removals, that's only a one-time quantity, and you can account for that, and you could potentially sell that off. But if another company wants to account for that, that just exists once. And if you account for that removal that you have in addition to accounting for the emission reductions,
No.
why does it not? Enlighten me.
Because in FLAG, in the Forest, Land and Agriculture Guidance, that the emission factor, or in the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, Land Sector Removals Guidance, or whatever it's called, LSRS now. Sorry for the acronyms, standards, not a guidance. Your emission factor is both your emissions at a carbon footprint level, LCA, and whatever removals you have as well. So it's not differentiated, it's part of your emission factor. Yeah.
But you have to report separately the removals.
You do. You have to
Yes.
report them separately because they want the transparency on what part of that emission factor is removals and what part of that emission factor is coming from other greenhouse gas sources. And that's going to get more and more granular. It won't just be removals separately from LCA emission factors. It'll be removals separate from all the different types of greenhouse gases you have.
Okay, just to add 2 points. I think on one that, I struggle to understand scope 3. I try. I listen to Kellyanne a lot, and then I go, but my head still hurts. It's really difficult to sort out. So I have sympathy for everyone trying to tackle it. But as far as I can work out for the reporting rights, I mean, especially if you're working with food, the scope 3 emissions, in reality, as Kellyanne mentioned, you're going down a chain of, let's say, value-added products, and those footprints all overlap. They're not unique. It's just, it's like doing it's like an LCA. I don't want to say it's an LCA, sorry. Similar to a life cycle assessment, right? You set a boundary. You know, the wheat has this boundary, the flour mill has this boundary, you know, the bread maker has whatever other boundary. These all overlap. That's why we keep saying reporting rights. From the question, so that's one. I don't see any co-claiming issues there, nothing. As long as you can demonstrate, what is it, that it's related? Chain of, what's the right word?
Chain of custody.
Chain of custody. I don't want to get the terms wrong. On the question, can you do both at the same time? I will say no, I don't think so. I think that in a year, if you have a unit, let's say you have one unit, for 1 year, you lease a reporting right to whatever chain of custody is going to pay you. That's great. For that year, it's leased. I don't think you should be selling it off. I think it's like this year we've held it. And then go through time, say you're selling it every year, that's fine. At some point, your temporary credit, well, you've held it for a long time, haven't you? It's quite straightforward to calculate what the avoided watts per square meter is from holding that temporary unit, right? So the longer it's held, the more avoided warming is actually involved. So I personally see no issue with, at some point, selling it off afterwards as an offset. However, for a double counting point of view, because reporting is not offsetting. It's not. However, having said that, I am still of the position for soil, mineral soil, and trees and things like this, this sort of sector of increasing carbon stock, I still think it is better economic sense for a grower to hold it longer. There's a temporal element involved that needs a lot more attention. But I have different opinions on permanent offsets and other types, and re-wetting of peat avoided emissions. These could be differently treated with time because, you know, I'm always looking at, okay, if you sell, what's the liability on the other side? If I sell something I've committed to for the future, what's the liability I'm accepting for that? And if I myself wouldn't sign that idea on a land, I don't feel comfortable saying someone else should. But
yeah, it's actually very much related to this conversation. I totally agree with Ish. So I think when we're talking about claims and credits, I think what we've got to get very clear on is the different use cases here. So we've been talking about scope 3 companies, and that's pretty clear. What they're using it is for reporting. Specifically to the French methodology, what happens is certain buyers, typically airlines, just because of the way that these French rules are designed, will buy those credits and use it as an offset credit. And then it does become a double counting issue. And I think that's where we're going to get very clear, and I think it's a beautiful segue into one of the questions, which I'm personally very curious about, and that is, you know, we've been talking a lot about the scope 3 bias and the insetting use case, but if you think about the CRCF credits used for voluntary action, what is that going to look like? For example, for carbon farming, we know that they don't qualify as permanent removals under SBTI. So what sort of buyers do you see outside of the agri-food businesses that will be buying these credits? And hopefully that clarifies that label bas carbone issue, because once it's used for scope 3, an airline can't buy it and use it for offsetting. That, I think, what they were talking about.
Actually, I was under the understanding that in the latest draft of SBTI, there is also an opening to using nature-based removals towards SBTI targets after 2035 or up to 51%. I'm very lucky that someone told me this just 3 hours ago, so now I can show off that I know. So it seems that they're more open to the nature-based removals now. On the topic of claims, I didn't understand if you agreed or disagreed with Kellyanne, but what the point of this person making this argument yesterday was, it's really about the claim. So, of course, only one entity can claim, I finance that mitigation action, so that credit belongs to me. That can only be claimed by one person. But at the same time, once this action has been implemented, this is indeed the carbon removals or emissions of that piece of land. And this is an attribute of that piece of land. So if in the value chain no one is claiming this happens because of me, but they're just reporting this information in their inventories, is it co-claiming? Because there is no claim that they are the incentive behind this improvement in the carbon footprint. They are just saying, okay, I source food from a farmer that has this carbon footprint. This is the only claim they make. It's a very genuine, open question, because maybe I don't have a view either or.
That's just what attributional accounting is, right? Is that it's your volumes times your emission factors. So whether it comes from a project that happened, or whether it comes from you changing the ingredients in your supply chain, or where those ingredients are sourced, or how that ingredient is processed, as long as it reduces the emission factor, it could be a reduction in your final footprint.
I think Julian also wants to say something.
Maybe just in addition, and also building on what Ishani said, I think the question of liability is really maybe the more interesting one, because once you start this co-claiming, the question is who in this chain actually continues to get product from a certain farm. And we know that supplier networks change, and so the question is, what happens to potential reversals on land that you had previously co-claimed? So who owns the liability of that? How is that process governed?
Sorry. As far as I am aware, speaking totally out of my area of expertise, it's great, it's a report every year. Your sourcing area will change every year. By definition, it's not a constant thing, whereas a piece of land is a constant thing. I think there's, liability in terms of, have you been truthful as a grower in a place, in a supply shed? Have you been truthful with your numbers? I think there's some liability there, but yeah, as far as I'm aware, each year the company reassesses. Maybe they supply from a completely different area that year. These are always going to fluctuate. I thought the point of Scope 3 was to bring light to it and show that it matters and try and get this down over time. And then in terms of liability, yeah, if you've made a unit on a piece of land and you have sold it off, and then you try and sell the reporting rights to companies, then I think that's an issue. And that's why in our registry conception, we put both things together. We put everything back to the parcel. But John?
I mean, I think this is a fascinating conversation, but this session was about how you build public trust, okay? And you've got, 6 active people sitting here, and we can't necessarily get agreement across the 6 of us, okay? So for me, I go back to look at basic principles, okay? First of all, for me, there has to be one and only one registrar. 2, there needs to be GIS tagging to it through blockchain, okay? So unless you do that, you will not carry the public with you, okay? And any dealing around that certificate, and the certificate is only created because the land manager has done something to improve the carbon stocks that is measured, and the certificate is issued as such. That the registrar has to be the clearinghouse where you've got the geotag, you've got the blockchain, so that there is complete digital robustness around that. And whether you're leasing it, whether you're sailing, that all has to be registered in the registry, okay? So we need to get those mechanics absolutely right. My big concern, and I've watched for 20 years the offset market being pulled through the gutters, okay? Me as a land manager, my peers will only get one crack at this. And I want it to be a good crack. And I want it right, okay? Otherwise, we will not carry the general public, and we will continue to be, and particularly me, because I'm a livestock farmer, will continue to be the pariah of society. And it is very important that actually people like me who started on this journey, not because I wanted to sell carbon, but I wanted to prove to society that I was not the pariah and the bogey that everyone made me out to be. So first and foremost, it was my reputation and the reputation of my peers. The second reason I did it purely and simply, is to build resilience in my food-producing landscape. Because what we haven't talked about really over the last 2 days is our climate has already changed. If I go to any of my peer farmers, what's the first topic of conversation? It is weather extremes. It's either too dry or it's too wet, okay? Pivotal in building resilience and productivity in that farm is the level of carbon in that soil. So the first reason I'm interested in this is I want to be a better land manager to have a more resilient food-producing landscape, which is my core activity, okay? I want a really good MRV because I want the feedback loop. If I do X, what do I get? Do I get half Y or 2Y? Then I'll know to do more X or less X, okay? So I'm the first customer for all of this. But I want to make sure then, as we explore how we monetize it, that we do it with integrity, and that I can take the public with me, and that I am not accused in 5 years' time, Gilliland, you've been greenwashing us again. Because if we do that, we lose the whole of this. And the one thing that is very clear, and then we heard yesterday, the European Union needs carbon removals equally to greenhouse gas mitigation. We cannot go on this journey without both. It's the reason, that DG Clima were asked to get involved in the first place. So we must do it with integrity. Otherwise...
Not magnitude is not equal, but equally...
Yeah. But in my case as a land manager, I end up doing both by default. I can't divide, I can't separate. So the pleasure that I'm here at all is, for the first time, carbon removals in the food-producing landscape are now being talked about. Because up until now, they were never talked about. I just emit. Yet I know I have activities that can build trees, plant hedges, build carbon in soils. That's in my gift. I can do that. And I want it reported. Because building public trust, if we don't achieve building public trust, we will lose this. And you will lose the ability to inspire and get behavioral change of land managers, because they have to do the heavy lifting here. Sorry.
Thank you very much. My name is Zaur from BAT Agra from Germany. Thank you very much for the very strong statements and very good discussion. My question is about, we are talking about the claims, but we know from the data from Germany, from the first and from the second national soil inventories, and also we saw today at the panel discussion that the soils in Europe losing carbon. So is it possible that we can in Europe, in arable lands with agricultural measures, not with the agroforestry, with hedges, landscape elements, with normal agricultural measures in that amount, increase soil organic carbon additionally without leakage emissions and make it in a stable organic pools, not that they will be decomposed after several years. Is it possible? And then we can talk about the claims that we will do that is effective for the climate and for the mitigation of climate change. Thank you very much.
Ish is racing for it.
Just like unpopular opinions, number one. When we look at fields in terms of how much light that field eats, so how much light the plants eat, what we see in croplands frequently is they're eating about half the light that, as I say, the scrubby, useless vegetation next to it, which happens to have diversity, happens to have things growing throughout the year, does. So already 50% less carbon is going into the cropland systems. So in terms of the types of interventions that are commonly talked about, personally I view them as tiny little tweaks for the soil carbon levels. Okay, put a cover crop in, yes, it's better, but don't expect a miracle if your soils are already starving, right? So that's number one. What the solutions are in terms of croplands for actually getting the input of carbon into those systems that would, actually get it to an impressive uplift, that's up to farmers to reinvent and make. I do also see quite a bit of an issue that the animals have been removed, and so animals speed up the rotation of carbon through the system, right? You don't, in a farming land, you don't want carbon like lock it down and it's not gonna go anywhere. And I know there's an argument in soil science about, is it this minerally associated organic carbon or is it particulate? Because particulate, it could disappear the next year. I think it's irrelevant. I really think that the more carbon you can push through the system, the better, because what you're trying to grow is the bucket and the turnover. And the farmers can comment better on this than me, but I think it's the functionality that's critical. So with the current cropping methods that I see, I'm not so impressed with the uplift. And I think food security should be looked at first. And I think John's point about resilience and adaptation should be looked at first.
Can I come in on that?
Please.
I was a continuous arable farmer for 30 years. And in those 30 years, I saw my soil organic carbon drop from 120 tonne per hectare to 80 tonne per hectare. Okay, that's what we recorded, that's what we measured. Okay, why? Because we did what we thought was economically right. Chemistry allowed us to do it. But now at 80 tonnes per hectare, do you know something? Suddenly it doesn't look so bright. I have to use more synthetic fertilizers, I have to use more herbicides, more pesticides. Now it just so happened, I woke up and I did something about it. And in my case, I planted my arable ground and I put in short rotation willow coppice for energy. Okay, just bear with me in a moment, okay? And in the last 30 years, I have lifted my soil organic carbon from 80 tonnes per hectare to 135 tonnes per hectare. You can say then I displaced food production with energy. So the icing on this cake is 4 years ago, we found that my willow trees were very tasty to cattle. And by the way, the willow leaf is full of condensed tannins. What do condensed tannins do? They interrupt the formation of methane in the gut of the cow. Last year, we published in Nature a 28% reduction in methane from a cow eating a willow leaf over a grass plant. There is a reason that my great-grandfather was a mixed farmer with trees and food production in the same place. And I think we do need to challenge ourselves, because you started the question you said, well, forget about silver pasture and agroforestry. Well, I have to say, for me, what am I doing? On my woodlands, I'm putting animals into my woodlands. On my grass pastures, I'm putting trees into them. And I'm coming from both ends, and I'm going back to where my grandfather, my great-grandfather was. But I'll tell you what I've got. I've got science this time. And now I understand why my grandfather and my great-grandfather was correct, and I was wrong. And it's really interesting when you actually do this data analysis. I am very fortunate. We have had the same block of land in our family for 5 generations. We've got the records of what happened. And so it really makes it very personal, but it has really taught me, and my son and my, who's now running the farm, he has made it central to what he is doing. And so for me, I believe diversity and complexity is healthy. Monocultures, the one thing that doesn't happen in nature is a monoculture. Yet what have we been doing for the last 40 years? We've been running monocultural agriculture. We've been running enclosed agriculture. Animals there, plants there. Yet if you are a microbiologist, what is the best way of generating spent arable soils? Farmyard manure. Defecating cows. Why? Their microbiome inoculates the soil biology. We need to get biological life back in there, which carbon is part of. But we need the wider microbiome stimulating that soil. If I get that right, do you know something? My carbon gets in place, but so does my water cycling, my nutrient cycling, my biodiversity, all those functions I want from a healthy soil, which is the building block for any food production. So I think in answering your question, I would argue our continuous arable rotations that many people use across Europe, I think their days are numbered. They cannot answer the soil biological question. How are you going to stimulate the biology of that soil?
Short, because it's really wrapping time, and there's a question up there waiting for the last half an hour with 10 thumbs up.
One sentence. One thing very exciting about croplands, 2 things very exciting about croplands is, and I know it's not in the legislation yet, but what I would think is you have a certain amount of synthetic nitrogen applied. If you were to swap that nitrogen out for something else, you have an impact on N2O, right? Very potent greenhouse gas. Please look at that. And then the other one I would say is enhanced rock weathering for particularly poor soils, poor productivity soils. I know there's a bunch of caveats, but that's also an interesting area.
So the question waiting up there for half an hour is, as a researcher working in VCM carbon prices, it has been very difficult to get prices info. Would the CRCF consider better price transparency? If anybody wants to pick this.
So that's true, because we also need to find some prices, because we're always asked to do impact assessments. I mean, we are doing an impact assessment for the climate targets, and we want to present CRCF as an enabler, and we need some numbers, and prices are very difficult to find. I don't remember, because there is in the regulation an annex which says what the information that the registry must provide. I doubt prices there, because it's a commercial information. So, yeah.
In a functioning marketplace, you can get price transparency, but I don't think it should be mandated by the registry itself, I think.
But I think we should also, we're not the only ones going on this journey. Australia has well gone on this journey, okay? And what they have done in Australia, at least they've tried to create an MRV for both the private carbon market, for Scope 3, and also for their emissions trading scheme. And so if you go to the clean energy regulator, and if you go through the process and you issue up your data and you get Australian carbon credit units, you have the ability to play in both the inset and offset market simultaneously till you find out where the price transparency is. And that is the one thing I do like in Australia, is that you can at least then bring some transparency what is a fair price. I may still opt to be an inset because I want my carbon associated with my food production, but at least allows then to bring some kind of transparency. My concern, if you keep the two markets apart, how do I as a farmer know what a fair price is?
The thing is that they have a regulated market. So it's like the ETS in the EU. Every hour you can see what the price of the allowances is, but because it's
I mean, you know, maybe that's where we have to go in the EU eventually. But I think. Yeah, no. Well, listen. I think it's very important. We should not look at this journey in isolation. Other parts of the world are going there too. Let's learn from them as well.
Absolutely agree, and I think also from a voluntary carbon market perspective, there are some larger offtake agreements in that space, and from there you can get some pricing information where over multi-year contracts you see these offtakes at certain prices. So these are some information, but of course more transparency will help the market long term as well.
Yeah. So we are going to go slightly over time, but we also started later, let's be honest. And we are going to go to the last slide of question for today. That's actually, in one word for the audience, what should carbon farming get right in the next 24 months? And actually, that's also the question for the speakers. So one word, 2 sentences, down to 2 minutes, 1 minute, whatever you can. What has to be got right in the next 24 months?
And then we bias the response if we reply immediately. Okay. I think we looked at trust from the perspective of integrity, but another big element is trust by the farmers that it's worth getting into this journey and they will not be left with no demand afterwards, or no compensation, no money. So I would say strong signals that demand will be there, and then of course following through on the signals.
Irishmen always have 3 words: education, transparency, and integrity.
I also have 3 words.
Very easy words.
Governance, accountability, and traceability.
I will switch it up with giving a sentence. So I think we now have the MRV tools in place to deliver on the transparency and the integrity aspect. But what I do think now is really that we need to turn to these registries to resolve these questions between offsetting, insetting, and to get that right. I think that is a critical aspect.
I had the same thing, so I'm just going to say, what's the difference between an offset and an inset?
Okay, perfect is the enemy of good. Keep going.
I want to thank all the speakers, and just for Valeria so she can buy this. The biggest at the moment is clarify any confusion and alignment of incentives. And then many more about motivation, robust technologies, easy models. But we can give this to you for free, open. Can this be open? Okay. And thank you so much to everybody, and thank you for joining us today.
No, well, listen. I'm a grandfather now.